What we're going to be talking about today is unable to locate a process for finding your M.I.A. equipment you can't locate while you're performing your PM. So we're going to go through what the code language says, well, introductions, of course, what the code language says. We're going to review some of the code language and how exact it is. We're going to look at what your policies might be and how to help you define those policies if you have policies or tweaking those policies. We're going to talk a little bit about maintaining that asset inventory as part of your ITM and PM process. And then we'll do questions and answers, but we'll say, don't save your questions till the end. If you have a question, raise your hand. We'll try to answer it in the context of what we're presenting. So myself, I'm Joe Stockman. I'm the Director of Product at FSI. I basically work with customers along with my team to sort of find out what their challenges are. How do we build stuff into our software to solve those challenges? Consulting with them to help them build out those processes in the product or in whatever product they may be using. I've been with FSI for 22 years. We started as a asset inventory company, so we would actually walk around hospitals looking for that unable to locate equipment. And during an inventory, there's stuff we couldn't find. They know they have hundreds of this type of device. We say we can find most of it. We look for help in finding those things. That's just part of finding it for the initial putting it in the inventory. But after that, your process is maintaining that inventory. But I have about almost 30 years just with healthcare CMMSs. So I'll pass it over to Mike.
Hello, everybody. I'm Mike Zimmer. I'm the Director of Customer Solutions here at FSI. I wear a couple of different hats. I work with both our solutions engineering team. Those are typically the folks that show up on site and take you through the demonstrations of what the different tools are capable of doing. And then I've recently taken over customer success and all of our efforts there to ensure that all of our customers get as much as they can and realize as much of a return on investment in the partnership that they've made with FSI. A little bit about update there. It's now 10 years in healthcare CMMS. It's not a competition. If it was, Joe wins. But yep, so both Joe and myself are oftentimes kneecap to kneecap with clinical engineering, healthcare technology management professionals to really understand the challenge that you all go through and how we can appropriately leverage technology in order to assist you in those different regards, including things like unable to locate. In terms of who FSI is, it would not surprise me if everybody saw FSI and they're like, who the heck are you guys? But at the end of the day, as Joe had mentioned, we started things off as a data collection company. And then all the customers that we were working with over that time period kept asking like, yeah, this is great. Thank you so much for making sure that we're at 100% kind of data capture on our inventories. It'd be great if you guys created a CMMS, a computerized maintenance management system, enterprise asset management tool for us to park this data in and start doing the various things that you all have to do with solutions like that. Many of the people that actually work on our team come from our customer organizations. They've had roles similar to yours. So whenever our customers interact with, say, support, implementation, I don't want this to sound pitchy. I'm not meaning for it to, but everybody has that experience in role. And there's some additional bullet points here. I'm not going to go through. Neither Joe nor I are super into reading from slides, so we're not going to do that. But we are proud of how long our customers work with us, the partnerships that we're able to build, and that's reflected in things like our customer retention rate, the number of hospitals that are currently in partnership with us, and then the number of countries that we also provide solutions to. So in terms of really the first component of what we want to take the team through today, let's do a quick refresh, a review around what the regulatory requirement, what the actual code language states in terms of keeping an accurate and complete asset inventory, and then what do you do when you can't find something? And just something to keep in the back of your mind, this is also going to apply for things like inpatient use, right? So we're talking about how you can leverage, well, one, we're going to talk about people, process, and technology. We'll get into the technology side of things, but we're really going to focus in on how do you set up your teams for success from a regulatory perspective around things like UTL. So, Joe is going to take us through both of us will take you through some of that specific code language. But importantly, is like, what does it not state explicitly? And so room for interpretation there. Joe.
Yeah, so there's different regulatory bodies. I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of the ones out there. The big player is the Joint Commission. They've been around since 1951, doing hospital inspections. Some of you may have used HVAP, which now is ACHC. They have a different set of regulations in code language around there. And also DNV, which has been around forever, but they only started doing hospitals in 2008. So they're relatively new, and that's probably the second biggest player in the agencies. And then don't forget about your local authorities having jurisdiction, or AHJs. You'll see that term around, what they require that might be different than the national agencies. And they all roll up to CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid. I don't know why there's not two M's in that one, but it is CMS. They've been on the news a lot lately, you've probably seen. But that's probably most people nobody even knew what they were up until recently. But that's everything sort of uses that language and makes it so you're adhering to two separate bodies, but ultimately it's CMS that they're reporting to and they're held accountable to.
Ooh, so cutting edge transition there. That was really nice.
That was most of our preparation was doing that. But just a show of hands, how many are using the Joint Commission? Sweet. That's always the case. It's always everybody. Any DNV people? Wow, no. Usually there's one. So, ACHC? All right. Any outside of Joint? I think everyone raised their hand for Joint Commission. So awesome. So just some of the language around it. If you do, you might hear of these other ones. DNV puts it all in the physical environment, Section 7. Joint Commission, most of it is in ECO 20403. There's some in ECO 20401. There's also CIHQ. That's one of the new players on the block. I've yet to any CIHQ. I forgot to ask that one. No. Usually not. So I always wanted to have a 20 ready if someone raised their hand to just thank you. You finally started using CIHQ. And like I said, other authorities having jurisdiction. So through the magic, we knew this, we read your minds. So we put together some slides on what the Joint Commission language says. Since you are all Joint Commission, we took the DNV slides out just immediately. So we're ready to go. But this is from ECO 20401. 20401 talks about managing the risks of medical equipment, whether it's high risk, non-high risk. Those are the two. So the actual language of ECO 20401 is medical equipment risks. I'm not going to read through this.
Are you sure? I think that's like a pro tip on presenting.
Pro tip.
If you read from.
I'm not a code nerd. Any code nerds in here? No one's going to admit it. I even put the little nerdy icon up at the top. But there are people that love that. It will spew off the language immediately. That's a good person to have a resource. I'm not making fun or making light of that. I have them I go to, like, what does this actually mean? But for this one, it's establishing risk, whether you're including that in the inventory. So you're evaluating. If you look at that whole sentence, the hospital evaluates new types of equipment before initial use to determine whether they should include it in the inventory. So when we look at the requirements for inspecting and testing and maintenance, we'll look at the percentages that you have to adhere to. I'll give you a guess of what the percentage. Any guesses on what the percentage might be, what you have to adhere to? Anyone know?
Pretty high.
What was that? Is that high risk or non-high risk? Yeah. All right, we'll answer that in a second. I don't know why in the language for hospitals that use Joint Commission, which this is the Joint Commission language, but they actually put this in the language. So for hospitals that don't use Joint Commission, that's actually the interesting part of that whole thing. So I don't know why they did that, but that's copy and paste right into this slide. But let's go into the ECO 203 about medical. That's EP2. This is all about high risk equipment. So for high risk equipment, you need to have 100% completion rate. So you need to document 100% completion rate. So we'll talk about what that means and what it doesn't mean when you're doing that, because obviously if you can't find it, you can't perform an inspection on it. So for high risk equipment, if you're doing an AEM inventory, that's with manufacturer recommendations. They also have a note about if you're doing an AEM, alternative equipment maintenance. That's a whole separate topic. We'll actually be doing a talk at that at the AMI conference, so we'll be doing an AEM topic discussion
with one of
there.
Our customers.
With one of our customers going to be co-presenting with us. But you also have to have 100%. So 100%, 100%. EP3 is for non-high risk, and non-high risk is also 100%. So if you're going through and looking at, how do I manage what's high risk, non-high risk? Yes, you have to go through that process, but you still have to complete 100% of it. So 2 EPs that sort of call that out, and they're very specific on what that means. That's the trick with this, and that's sort of your one of the takeaways we're going to do from here. So let's look at the next slide and look at what we interpret as part of ours. So some of the stuff I highlighted, it is very vague, both on the Joint Commission and DNV side. It's whether to include it in inventory. So what does that mean? So is it really in your inventory if you can't find it? You could do things with the asset status in your CMMS and change that to not found or unable to locate, something along those lines where you're only reporting on things that are in your inventory. So you could do 100% of inspections in your inventory. High risk versus non-high risk, both are 100%. You have to do 100% of what you find, is the way I would interpret that. So don't get too into the weeds. So if you're trying to build a whole risk strategy, I wish they would just tell you which equipment was high risk and what they know. But it's
up to the organization, up to the team to successfully risk score and risk classify.
They don't even tell you too much about. They do give you some examples. I know there's specific EPs around laser equipment and nuclear equipment. So there are some different rules around those, imaging equipment, different types of things. So, and then 100% completion. So complete 100% of the assets you find and can perform an ITM. There's the equipment obviously that's hooked up to a patient that you can't do a full ITM, but if it's hooked up to the patient and working and keeping that patient alive, is that an inspection? Did you inspect that and see that it's working? So is that your initial inspection? Can you work your policy into that? And that's going to be the next piece that we go into. And Mike's going to take over and talk about sort of defining the policy and what that means. So
yeah, so if we were to just go back real quick to kind of oh man, it's even better in reverse. So the second bullet point on this slide. So what is it that the code language doesn't state? And everyone having worked with the Joint Commission previously, I'm sure I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. They tell you what the objective is, but they don't necessarily provide a ton of guidance around how to get there. So in my opinion, at least, that provides an opportunity for organizations to really project plan to establish the policies, the procedures, the workflows, the automation in order to hit that target while still successfully kind of documenting everything, right? So let's talk about policy just kind of in general. Yes, sir.
Before you move on,
yeah.
help us. ITM. What's that?
Oh. Yep. Told you. So ITM is it's a PM. So an acronym that's being used a little bit more prevalently in kind of our side of things. Maybe let's say on the solutions partner side of things.
What's it stand for?
Inspection, testing, and maintenance. Yeah.
And it's kind of like the new like how HTM now is the new clinical engineering. ITM is the new PM. Because you're not really preventing, you're inspecting this to make sure, and you're testing it to make sure it's safe. So it's a combination of inspecting, testing, and maintenance. But everyone still calls it, we're doing PMs this week or something like that. That's you call them what?
Scheduled
maintenance, yeah, scheduled maintenance.
Nice. Let us know if we over answer any questions. I think that was a prime candidate for doing that. So let's talk about like policy design. That happens outside of any piece of software, any piece of technology, right? We're not even getting there just yet because if you break things down from a people process, you could probably include policy and procedure in that second group of P words. then you get into, how do we instrument for or enforce it or increase adoption through the use of technology. So let's back up the train a little bit and talk about defining that policy. One, it's your organizational policy, but you can pick the brains of your colleagues in the industry. You can pick the brains of your solutions partners that you happen to be working with. If they don't have any sort of best practice recommendations, maybe we should talk a little bit more, but yeah, and it's all about designing how is it that your organization, your team is going to approach something like unable to locate. A lot of text on this slide. I'm not gonna to read a lot of it, but just something to note, if you're wanting some more detailed kind of structured information around designing an unable to locate policy, we do have a white paper that we published a couple months ago, so it's pretty fresh, that we can make available to you. Just stop by the booth number 511. Also look for Joe or I. But in your policy, you're going to define things like what does in-service really mean for your organization. So, that is going to be coded in terms of a status of asset. But when it falls outside of that in-service definition, you know that it's going to be treated differently downstream and ultimately probably reflected in your compliance reporting. How does the team document attempts to locate? This is the number one question I get from our existing partners around, how do we instrument for this? And the good news is that there's a variety of different ways to do it, but it's about making it really easy on the part of the person that is out there trying to find it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. How is missing equipment communicated to the owning cost center? So how do we delegate the search effort to that owning cost center? Be like, look above the ceiling tiles, open up the cabinets in the various rooms to try to track it down. I love the ceiling tile reference because I'm sure you all probably have experience with devices getting lost there.
A lot of times they'll hide it too, from a standpoint of, sometimes sure if it takes you long to deliver that, they'll be like, oh, let's keep this one in the bag here, hide it in the closet. So when we need it, we have one available. But that makes your lives harder to do. Anyone have one of those people that do that?
I'm seeing a lot of head nods, which is, I get life from that. Thank you very much.
I'm gonna start hiding equipment in hospitals just for fun.
But only do that after we design a solution around equipment distribution and to build that trust between that staff and clinical staff. But when is the device marked as inactive? How many attempts do we need to find it? What does this mean downstream from your completion rate reporting within whatever solution it is that you happen to be using? What are the technical needs of that tool or capabilities required of that tool in order to enforce that policy? Joe, I think we're going to transition back over to you.
We are.
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about asset inventory. As I stated, that's how we started. So, finding that equipment is, getting it in the initial inventory is step one. Hopefully you're all there at your hospitals. Sometimes you just need to reset and start over because you don't know what you have, what you don't have, especially with acquisitions or purchases of new equipment. How are you managing that? How do you set up your inspection testing? And we knew we would get that question, so that's why we spelled it out up here: the inspection testing and maintenance program, your PM program, and then best practices around that. So let's first talk about the asset life cycle and how you perform these things. So step one, asset inventory. That's just literally, think of any brand new hospital people that have a new building going up or all new equipment. I'd be lucky if I see a couple head nod, but that's the easy part. Before it's in service, you do get all your equipment maintained. Maybe when it's coming in, you upload, the list of assets, you put barcode tags on them, RFID tags on them, whatever you need to do. You get them into the system. And then you schedule them all. So that's also, the easy part. So you schedule your ITMs, what frequency, you can balance it all out, put them wherever you want, make sure you're doing the same amount each month, so your technicians are good. And then you need to find the equipment and perform the ITM. So a year down the road, all that equipment, it's all over the place now. So now you got to go and find that. And hopefully, if you have a large hospital or a multi-hospital system, it becomes a challenge. Sometimes that equipment shows up in another hospital because they transport it with the patient in an ambulance. So, how do you know that it's there? A lot of times you don't. They're not tracking that. The clinical side is not letting you know those things. We had one customer that another hospital system in the same city called them and like, we have an asset with your tag on it. So it was a, competitive hospital that said, how did we get your equipment? I don't know if that's happened to anyone here. Other hospital shows up, maybe they're stealing it. I don't know.
Yeah.
What was that? Ambulance. So an ambulance take it from one, like if you don't specialize in something, you transfer to another hospital. But yeah, it's a, you're in the best interest of the patient. That's probably a good thing that that's happening, but it's also, you're losing that. And nice of them to call back and just not put their own label on it. So you perform the ITM. We recommend doing other things as part of that. Is if the equipment's old or outdated, do you check conditions or things along those lines? Evaluating the life. Maybe if it's older, you need to perform PMs more often on that piece of equipment. So you can go different directions. The further you go down the path, the more different directions you can go. So you're evaluating the life of the equipment. Then if it's broken or not functioning, you're either repairing or replacing that equipment. If you do repair that equipment, you go back up and maybe you reschedule it. Maybe it takes a while. You send it out to a vendor to get fixed. It takes 6 months to get back. Do you change the schedule? Do you not change the schedule? When do you do the ITM again? You try to keep everything all nice and neat in January, February, March, but over time, with delays, with finding it, you're really required, when is it out of compliance? It's from the last time it passed the inspection. If it's a year, from when it passed the inspection, you have a year until the next time. Well, the one that passed inspection 3 months ago is going to be due 3 months before the one that you just got back from the vendor and they repaired it. Any vendors in here, by the way, that are repairing equipment from, not from the hospital side, but they're sending it to you to get repaired. So then, just verify, hey, is this still in my inventory? There's also a component of going back up and looking for new, as new assets coming in, you're going through that process. So it's like, the row, row, row your boat song. You start the song and then you go, someone else starts it later on and you just say, it's really fun. We would sing it, but we're not going to go ahead and do that. So.
And one thing to call out, we're focused in on UTL or unable to locate kind of strategies, but there needs to be a policy and procedure at each kind of step of this asset's life cycle. And what does that mean for your organization? So I'm thinking around things like asset inventory. When you're initially onboarding it and you're performing that incoming inspection that I'm sure everybody does, what does that need to look like, feel like, to make sure that we capture all the critical information about your device inventory? But I think that's a little bit of an aside and something that just occurred to me. And there needs to be some sort of technological support for each one of those policies and procedures within the tool they use day in and day out. And there's another cutting edge animation. So Joe, what about this cycle are you showing that's incomplete?
It's you're never done. It's you think you get that equipment and it's there. You're always repairing it. You're always replacing it. You're always tweaking your schedules. You're always checking inventory, whether it's temporarily because it's unable to locate or putting it back into inventory because you found it. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So it's the arrow just doesn't go. There's no done box. You're never done. And most of your equipment is mobile, at least volume wise, maybe not financially wise. So part of it is when you're structuring your procedures, when you're performing your ITMs or PMs, how do you automate some of those things? How do you put policies in place to do that? So one is, did you find the equipment? Is the equipment in operation? Is it hooked to a patient right now? Can you ask those types of questions? And then based on those questions, change things about that piece of equipment, that work order, that status. So, did I find it? Yes. If it's yes, that's easy. It's probably most of your equipment. You're probably finding most. It's that last 10 or 5 or 10% that cause you the most hassle. If it's there, you PM it. If it passes, put a sticker on it for the next month or however you mark it as when the next one's due. Training the staff on what the sticker to use, if there's a different color each year, a different color.
How to pull the asset inventory report for their cost center, et cetera. Yeah.
We also recommend, the condition of the equipment. If you're looking at that, like if you're doing some things like capital planning, tracking those things. So if you have equipment that's being used more often than others, and maybe it's damaged or cracked or something along those lines, you could start tracking that type of information. So unless you have anyone here with unlimited budgets to buy whatever you want, if you do, great. But if not, how do you plan? How do you know which equipment to replace? Like we need to have this type of money to replace equipment. So if you are going to do that type of analysis, getting that condition information is important as well. And then when you do get into those situations, do you flag and modify the asset somehow? So it is, like I said, is it changing the asset status to unable to locate? Is it changing the work order status to canceled, unable to locate, or something along those lines? And then what do you do next? You change the schedule to come out next month to look for it again. We'll talk a little bit about the unable to locate part and sort of a strategy around just looking for that equipment and documenting that process as well. So can you use technology to assist? One item is a RTLS, a real-time locator service or system. I forget.
I think it's real-time locationing.
Locationing.
Yeah.
Anyone here using an RTLS to help locate equipment? Anyone love the accuracy of it? You do? Awesome. I asked that question specifically. We have a lot of questions around, but it's not perfect. We have one hand stay up of the hands that were raised for those that didn't see, but it does help. It does get you close to the asset. We've seen customers say it tells us where it is, but it's actually below us versus because that's where all the network things are in the ceiling. So it's thinking, oh, I'm on the first floor when you're really on the second floor. But they can help. We are not an RTLS system, but that's a great technology to help you find some of this equipment. So even if it helps you find, of that 10% that you can't find by looking, find the 10%, maybe you find 90% of the ones with the RTLS, so now you're down to only 1% of the equipment that you can't locate. I'm just, giving you examples of what the numbers might be. It is based on how good your RFID system is, your networking infrastructure is a big component of that. There's still hospitals that have no Wi-Fi in certain areas. The basement is like the dead area. You can't use it in those areas. So if somebody is hiding a piece of equipment somewhere, and we have one customer that all the Wi-Fi just shuts off, so all the equipment's located at the door to the shop. It's like, so if it goes into the shop, there's a big group of equipment right at that door, and if it goes out the back door and in somewhere else or to another hospital, it's like a big clump of equipment right there. But an RTLS system, real-time location system, is one way to help you find those things. The other thing we have are these things called humans. So we'll go to the next slide. And this is what Michael alluded to a little bit earlier with, how to find that. What are some of the methods you could use? So again, consider what's in use. In use is hooked to a patient typically. You can't get access to that because that patient's on that. So that's really, it's an unable to perform. We toggle with different terms, unable to perform, unable to locate, but you have to have policies around those and changes to the status of what those be. Maybe you have two different statuses for that, unable to locate and unable to perform. With an unable to perform, you can capture things like, the room it was in at the time. Those rooms might change, but for long-term, types of equipment or ICU type of equipment, maybe it doesn't. Do you work with the staff to say, hey, when this patient is off this equipment, can you let us know? Do you put a temporary tag on it that says, hey, when this is done, call this number and we'll test it and do all those things. A lot of it is making sure that the clinical staff knows not to put a out of compliance asset and use that to hook it up to a patient.
Or do you leverage technology and integrate your existing solution into something like ADT codes so that when that patient gets discharged, you can automatically flag that asset, send an alert to the team to let them know that they need to pick it up and perform the PM.
Mm-hmm.
Other potential application and technology there.
You could link to the patient's MRN number, that's the number of the patient. Something.
You don't really want.
You got to be careful with patient information and stuff. So just a word of warning, if you're going to do that, just be careful with that.
Yep.
Maybe that goes into your discharge system to say, hey, put the asset number in that system or something. Correct. Or that, rather than not in your CMMS. You don't. I saw heads like, no, we don't. We don't do that.
A curveball at you. That comment there.
Search potential locations, like Mike said, above the ceiling, a very common hiding place, but the closets, the the clean room, the dirty room, where they might be hiding that. I saw a lot of heads nod when I said, do people like have their own
Hoarding, yeah.
Hoarding is a good word,
Yeah.
type of thing. And then see, were there service requests? Hey, did we repair this equipment before? And maybe we PM'd it before. Where was it during that service request? Was it in another hospital? Check with those other hospitals in your system, or all the hospitals in the tri-state area as well. Now you can't do that, but look for those particular items. If you do have things segmented to different departments, I know people try to do that. Like these are the ones for X-ray. So here's the equipment for the the X-ray area. Here's the for the dialysis, and those, obviously those machines will be there, but sometimes equipment moves with the patient to those areas, back and forth. If a patient moves to different floors or to different, they do go to intensive care for a while and come back, that equipment could be all over the place. But if you know exactly where that was done last time you did the PM, it might help you find it. And if you're updating that asset information with, if you're tracking the department that it's associated with, did that get changed? Could that be part of your inspection, testing, and maintenance? That, hey, is this in the department that it said it was going to be in? If not, open up that asset and change the department. Now it is over here, or do you bring it back to the department? Like, take it back. Like, shame on you. Slap their hands and take it back to the department that it owned. I have to treat them like children sometimes, I guess. And then any vendors, does he have? Like, he's the vendor, so is it still being worked on? Are you tracking when it goes out to a vendor? Is there a status on the assets? It's out to vendor for repair. Are you maintaining all that? So you could easily report on all that stuff. You might save yourself a lot of time looking for something if you just document where that is. And when I say document, I don't mean, I see a lot of people walking around with those little spiral binders in their pocket and they write it down. And but no, document it in your CMMS, in your tracking system. So when you do run that report, you know where it is. So don't be shy about putting it in there. Creating work orders for it. If a vendor is repairing it, is that a corrective maintenance work order that you transfer to the vendor, you assign it to the vendor, you have an open work order for it, so you know where that might be. So, and then I talked about the other hospitals as well. So, and over on the right side, what are you doing? You're changing the work order status. We talked about that. That's, work order status and asset status are really the tracking mechanisms of documenting this. Because if you just have a work order and people are just keep adding notes to the work order,
Can't report on that.
how do you report on that? Who said that? Oh, that was you. That was me. Like, it came from this side, but that's because there's a speaker over here. Like, who are you? And then also, what's the follow-up plan when you find it, when you do find that equipment, when it does come back from the vendor? So, and then how do you, how many times do you look for that? That's also part of the policy. I've heard a lot of, 3 strikes and you're out type of thing.
Yep.
When do you look for that equipment next? We'll ask some questions. There might be a slide later, but commonly I look for it this month, and then I look for it next month. So as part of my next month's PMs, I'm looking for that equipment again, and then maybe the following month, if I don't find it 3 times, then I retire it. So how are you tracking those 3 times? How many people are doing it something along those lines? Like, you're looking for it the next month. And then how many just wait till the next cycle? Like, oops, I canceled, this is due in January, I didn't find it. Next January it comes out, still didn't find it. And then that's when you take it out of your inventory. And then how are you tracking the status of that one too? So I see a couple hands on that one, but.
So for us, we have to at least have 2 to 3 document attempts per month. After those document attempts, we end up leaving it for the customers or the departments to find, locate. We send out repeated reports between the 15th to the 30th of the month. We update every 5 days or close to the day after, saying that, hey, this is still unable to locate. To remind them, giving them like last known location, last inventory date, how long it's been past due, and then we basically, if we get any kind of information, either they bring it down with mobile, because we have 17,000 pieces of equipment in the hospital that see regular maintenance. And so if it's mobile, it's up to them since it's past due to bring it down. If it's not, then they give us locations, we send our techs up, and they put down their priority list based on like what else they have high risk being top priority.
Yep.
UTLs that are past due, but like not soon to be upcoming. So like 6 to 12 months, if it's like, oh, it's about to be repopulated in like a month, like, hey, like,
Let's just get it done.
yeah, let's just get it done now, but we're gonna have to do the next one, so let's put that in lower priority, but you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure it's everyone thing. So 17,000, 5 technicians, is that what you got? 9, okay. No, but that's another thing too. You know, there's a lot of work to do, and you know, maybe you incentivize the staff to help find it. Put a FBI most wanted, 10 most wanted pieces of equipment or something list up there, and like the post office does with the FBI.
Yeah, but you know, I think just one thing to add about this particular slide, Joe, is we started off by talking about documenting a policy. So this is what this means for fill in your organization's name. Now we're talking about how the humans go about trying to find it. And that's obviously an important piece of the puzzle. But as you just mentioned, what was it, 17,000 assets to 9 technicians? You have to make the policy kind of enforcement invisible through the stack of solutions that you happen to use to manage your inventory. And so that's one thing to call out, just from like a solutions kind of agnostic point of view, is the tools that you use need to make it easy on your teams in order to follow along with what it is that you need them to do. Because ultimately, you know, we're needing to document this kind of information in a structured, and I'm meaning that in the technical kind of database language, a structured format, so that ultimately we get into, and I'm going to come back to this slide in just a moment, we get to the output of this process, which is really going to prove out how successful you were in enforcing your unable to locate policy and procedure, your strategy, and the people that are part of it. So this is an example of, let's say, a percent completion report out of a CMMS, an enterprise asset management tool, might be ours. But you need to have the ability of coaxing out or splitting out those devices and their corresponding PMs or ITMs as unable to locate. That needs to be as push button as possible because the teams are busy out there. With the added flexibility of including those UTL rates so that you can report against that to, say, the EOC committee when you're wanting to illustrate the fact, yeah, we're doing a great job, but team, we could use your help in finding these devices. So when those devices are found,
go back just one more real quick. I just want to call it one more. Nope, the one we were on that had the recommendations for finding.
Yeah, this one?
That one there.
Okay.
I just want to include, like, when you're doing your reporting, definitely include those unable to locate, unable to perform at. I'm not saying you would just ignore them. You still need to report on those numbers. You still need to know what those numbers are. That just doesn't go towards your 100% of the incomplete. Like, so you do want to document those. So it's just not like, hey, we couldn't find it, so we're not going to show you anything. You know, the inspectors know it's not realistic to find every piece of equipment. So make sure you're documenting that as well.
So the other part of this process is what happens when you find it. Our customers handle this in a variety of different ways, but typically what happens is you need to update the status of that device and find an easy way to bring it up to date on its PM procedure, its PM schedule. Retest it, document that all taking place, and then kind of effectively put it back into service so that from a regulatory perspective, it's been PM'd in the way that it needs to, and there is effectively time date stamps around the changes you're making to this device.
And this is the key, you know, document it and document the retest. One of the top findings it was actually the DNV side, but I'd imagine it's not too different on the Joint Commission side, was you did all this stuff and then you retested it and, you know, it failed, and then you just put it back in service. Like, you didn't document the retest. So make sure you are documenting that retest. The same thing you're doing to test on the PM. Once you fix it, do that same test again and document that as a separate work order, as a corrective work order, as this is the past work order. So you do have that link to the asset. So you see the failure, even if it's one day later that you fix it, make sure that's documented. If you're not documenting that, retest after you repaired it, and that's even true with you found it type of thing. You found it, you fixed it immediately, and you put it back into service. Make sure you're documenting both tests on that piece of equipment. So. So some recommendation.
Kind of skipped ahead and then
yeah.
came back.
So look, obviously look for the equipment. Where should it be? That's the obvious one. That's the whole point of this one. And use technology if you have it. So I know some of the bed companies that come in and do your bed maintenance, they have their own little scanners that can find equipment. I think Hillrom has their own software that they're using. If you are using vendors to come in and do those, they might have some of that technology. Manage the process with creating the follow-up work. It's knowing that follow-up work. A work order is a work order for a reason. It's a reminder that you have to go do work. A PM is a reminder that you have to go do work. So use the work order as a reminder that you need to go look for that versus just leaving it open. And those things, if you're documenting in notes, like he said, and then drop the mic and left the room, you can't document notes. You can't report on notes. Change your equipment status is taking it out of inventory. Make sure you just don't have unable to locate. Make sure you have a retired or something like, or I retired this because I couldn't locate it. If you notice in the report, we'll look at it again, but there was a ton of statuses that we're using to track some of that stuff as well. So I know it's really easy to read, but that's the work orders, the status of the work order that you might use to document all this stuff and track the changes between this stuff and date and timestamp those items. So
we have a question.
Yeah, go back.
Yes. I see all of that one, but I see the key player is not there.
The which one?
The key player is not there in the recommendations. So we have to work with the users of whoever's in charge of the thing. So I don't see anything like that you communicate with the users, that you missed that one, maybe ask for help from them.
Yes.
That is part of the recommendation, I think.
No, it's good. Maybe it's a way to remind us, look again, look again, look again. That slide about looking again is a lot of that was about, working with the departments and the users and the clinical staff on where that equipment might be.
So in addition to delegating some of that searching for stuff you can't find, what else should the users be told to do, or how can everybody in this room work better with those end users of the device in order to enforce this policy?
No, I like that.
That's a question. Yeah.
I think he's going to say is there's some policies in hospitals that we have to send an email to the end user, maybe a leader, before you have a certain amount of days that you're looking for a piece of equipment, and then if you don't find it, it needs to be taken out of service. But before you do that, you have to send this email as a part of policy. Some policies have that.
And that's usually a departmental ownership of inventory kind of report that you're sending out with the devices that are marked as unable to locate. I'm seeing some head nods.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
It's you send out what you can't find in their department.
They look for it. Yeah.
The process of not just taking pieces of equipment out because you can't find it. It's
right.
Days after you've done what asking the user to help look for it, like you were saying.
And document that too.
Aligned with what you were recommending there? So yes, ma'am.
What I've had is my hospital, county hospital, they're very strict about, unable to locate. The third week, like before the last week of the month, I sent out an email per department, so everybody kind of like leadership-wise has the accountability of the thing we can't find up until then. And then for them, the thing is that they claim that they don't know what this equipment is just by making model, like we know what it is.
Sure.
And they're not going to go look for it, so I've had to get a picture and like put
and like a user-friendly name, probably.
Like a picture of the tag number of each model, let us know, and then that's worked for me. And they kind of have to assist at that point.
You haven't given them any room to be like, I don't know what this is. Yeah.
I gave it to you. We're still looking how much, and then sometimes we'll find out that we threw it away or something like that. I haven't seen this in years.
Wow.
It's all always documented.
Right. One more. Sorry. A real quick question. Do you all track recovery rates? Like who does a good job of finding this stuff when it's okay? I was just curious about that. Sorry.
We have a process that every month our system generates, we close the work order when we can allocate, and we attach the email that we send to the director of the department, and we also have a letter, a special letter that we follow up with, included all the equipment that we're looking for that department. So once we attach that to the work order, we put it in a status can locate, close the work orders, and our systems detected that that work order is unable to locate and generate a new work order PM for the next month.
Mhm.
But it doesn't generate, it has a search PM, it says UTL PM. So we do it 3 times.
Great.
And then once we can find it between the department and the technicians, we have documented that, and then we retire the equipment and disposition the equipment in that process. And we let them know if they find it, they have to let us know to reactivate and do the PM to go back to an active status. So that's a process.
That's how you close the loop.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's great.
We close the work orders every month.
Mhm.
But the work order is closed on the UTL status. So
And then
that
from a completion reporting, that gets filtered out, I would imagine? Yeah.
It's flagged as an incomplete, unable to locate, and generate a new PM work order. As
Yep.
a UTL.
Okay. I like that. That's cool. That's a cool approach. Sir?
The question that one, I don't know if you updated this one with the database system automatically. I have using one database system. We report the automatically the UTLs. We are not at this point. We are asking for how we can find out how many UTLs we find in the year or something. We don't have that. Let's say that.
Got it.
Yeah.
Put it on that.
So that'd be a good code to add, like a good status to add of, so you know exactly what those are, and maybe every month you're looking at how many did we set as unable to locate. So in various months you have that, and you can make the case for an investment in an RTLS system or something along those lines. I thought I saw a hand move over here. Yes.
Yeah. This is all familiar to me. I used to database manage about a large medical center, 47,000 devices. So all of these, and I wanted to mention, we do the 3 strike usually 90 days. So every end of the month we'll send, hey, we are not able to locate this to cost centers and everything. And then we archive it, we change the equipment stats. One thing that stuck me is the last one that says permanently remove equipment. I never recommended this.
Yeah, maybe that's the permanent remove is a status. So it's a status like,
Yes, the change equipment.
so it's not
status,
deleting it. We never delete. We actually remove deletion from our system because people were doing it and like.
Yeah, I had to make it clear to technicians.
Yeah.
I removed the access.
Maybe we'll change the word. I could see where you got confused then. But yeah, we mean a different status. So status of, but thank you for that. We'll clarify that. So
Shame on you, Joe Stockman.
yeah, that was me. So it was late at night. We were putting that together. So.
I would also say in addition to what these folks are doing at the department level, a lot of hospitals or a lot of shops reported out to the environment care committee too.
Right. Okay.
So there's some pressure from leadership to say, hey, clinicians, you need to get your act together and help these folks.
Right.
A hoarding status. Maybe we need a hoarding status and call out who's the hoarder and blame the department.
Well, that kind of happens automatically.
Yeah. Everyone knows who that hoarder is. So way in the back, we got a question. Yeah, like if a new device shows up and it's not in your inventory, is there, something that flags you that says, hey, we have this RFID tag that we don't recognize that's floating around. You might want to go find that and see what that is. That would be, we're not an RTLS system, but that would be a function of the RTLS system, but we could definitely consume that information and create the work order to just say, go see what this is and enter it into your inventory. So that's a great call out of the use of an RTLS system. So if equipment comes in from another hospital, transferred the opposite way. So now you're the owner of that equipment that you didn't know about. Now you're using something in your hospital but they're not you, but one of your users is using something that you didn't test. So where it come from, test it to the same standards that you would test it to. Is it out of compliance from their standpoint? Where is that? So you need to check all that and do that as well. But great question on the RTLS, and I'm not sure when you came in, but we did a little bit of topics on that about who's using one and some way to a show of hands. Accuracy was an issue with those as well. I'm sure you've seen that too. So, but it helps. It's not like it's not useful. It does help, but it's not the perfect. Everyone thinks it's like, oh, it's going to tell me exactly where this is. It doesn't do that. So don't think that it does, but don't think that it's not useful because of that either. So. So that's probably the biggest takeaway. As she said, exactly 32% have poor documentation around their unable to locate strategy. But to your point, you know, you were actually copying and pasting the emails into the notes of the work order. You know, you brought up the emails as well. Attaching that email to the work order, to the unable to locate work order, to the initial work order, documenting those number of attempts, you could report on them, documenting even the status of reactivating, so you could report on how many did you reactivate versus just going back to an in-use status. So it's in use, off schedule, or, you know, type of thing. And then if you want to test it again sooner to get it back on the same schedule, you can go ahead and do that. So awesome.